The long hours of constant strain had finally taken their toll. My body was starting to fail at the worst possible time. The world felt like spinning just when the rebel army was about to launch their most critical all-out assault. I gritted my teeth as new waves of dizziness assaulted my senses. Overwhelmed, I almost collapsed to the ground but found myself being held up by Verita. It was great to have a medical professional nearby. SYRINE, the fluctuation of your health vitals are reaching unacceptable levels. I have taken the liberty of directing the encirclement operation. Please stand down. Cryptora advised, finally breaking his silence on my condition which I was sure he was aware of. Yes, please take over on that, but I am not standing down. The most crucial part has just begun. The Baneblades are coming out. Is Operation Kidnapping viable with the on-field situation? Yes, the conditions are viable. Then we will push on with it. Get the elements ready. Understood. Lady SYRINE, you seem unwell. Please take a rest. Verita advised while helping me to stand. No, Verita. Not now, not when so many lives are on the line and the chance to end this is finally here. I replied with some difficulty, I need to see this part through. They are starting to move. All 3 Baneblades appear to be moving into frontal positions. Are you sure you can continue? Cryptora asked with a hint of concern. Truth be told, I am not sure, but this needs to be done. Verita, release me. After this, I will take a rest. I ordered and the sister reluctantly complied. After steadying myself, I dove back into the god's point of view again and saw the full offensive coming. An impressive amount of vehicles and troops were moving towards our line. Further out, a huge bulk of our forces that were deployed further away earlier were now following Cryptora's directive and started coming around to encircle the whole rebel army. This was the final phase of our grand trap. Now we just needed to kidnap their leaders and box them in. I watched intently as all 3 battle groups of the rebel army started moving forward, each battle group led by a Baneblade flanked by many battle tanks. They had learned their lesson. This time their formation had teams of mixed infantry squads and fighting vehicles acting as forward elements while the tank cruised at combat speed right behind them. I even saw an Ogrin leading one of the infantry formations. There was no avoiding mass casualties if we directly clashed with such solid formations. Meanwhile, smoke screen shells and tricks were running low on our side, so it was time for my final light show and Operation Kidnapping. The basic idea was simple enough. I would try to use my abilities to stun the whole rebel army by totally overwhelming their communication network plus distracting them with my halo light show. While that was being done, we would try to kidnap the Baneblades and cover our act with the last supplies of our smoke screens. I had always got a soft spot for giant tanks, and Cryptora had a deep respect for venerable war machines. So it was a no-brainer for us to cook up an elaborate plot during last night's lengthy discussions to try getting the Baneblades over intact. As a bonus, it also had the potential to sever the rebels' leadership since all their battle group leaders were using Baneblades as mobile command centers. Due to the ritual, this part had instead become the do-or-die crucial point of the entire battle. We had the planning done in detail, however what we did not anticipate was the condition I was in when the crucial moment approached. My body was still shivering when Cryptora dropped his update again. They're coming now. Back-end connections with all 3 Baneblades confirmed. All elements for the final light show and kidnapping stand ready. If this fails, we will have no choice but to incur massive casualties. How long do I need to keep it up once this started? About 5 minutes. Tell me when it is time. Understood. Tottering between staying awake and fainting, I was conserving my strength while waiting. After an indeterminable amount of time had passed, Cryptora finally dropped the green light. SYRINE, it is time. Time to go. I solidified my focus and activated thought acceleration as a massive amount of command pulse burst off from me into the battlefield. I took over all the Vox networks. Next, I got ready for the final light show. Turning selfie mode on the Skull probe, I relayed my visual and audio to all Nuntius Halo and Imagifier flyers. This never failed to cringe me up, but it was necessary. Finally, I sent directives to the machine spirits of all 3 Baneblades, overriding their operators, and ordered the super heavy tanks to immediately go to their designated spots on the battlefield at maximum speed while shutting down their targeting support systems. By then, I felt so weak and had nothing prepared to say for this final act. In the back of my mind, I was thinking maybe just go in, spam my halo while scolding the rebels a bit. As I was lost in thoughts, the data load reached me and it was so straining my vision became blurred. I realized this might actually be too much for me and panicked. Oh. This is bad. I felt like slowly being crushed by the very air around me as the data stream started to look so distant away, nothing but thunderous thuds of heartbeats in my ears. Thump, 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 thump. Too fast. How was it that my heartbeat sounded so incredibly fast? Oh right. I have 2 hearts. Throne. I need 5 more minutes. My mind was collapsing. I felt myself clutching at straws to maintain my synapses. But we are so close. Another wave of nausea hit me like a truck, sending me dangerously close to fainting. In desperation I bit down on my lower lip, using the sensation to fortify what was left of my concentration. Verita was shouting something nearby but no meaning came through. My perception of time had become haywire as thought acceleration became unstable and reality started slipping away from me. 5 minutes. I need to just stay awake for 5 more minutes. What else is 5 minutes long? A walk? Wait, I can't leave the podium. A song? Where can I? Hold on, there is one here in my pendant and its playtime is exactly 5 minutes. Working with the last ounce of strength in my coherent mind, I managed to squeeze out a command pulse. Play Beautiful World.mp3. A familiar melody started playing in my head, slowly and softly at first, but before I knew it, the song got louder and louder until it resonated throughout my warped sensory perception. It's only love. It's only love. My last bit of consciousness was clinging to the rhythm of the song like a desperate drowning sailor holding onto a piece of floating wood in a raging ocean. Lend me your strength, Sensei Utada. That was my last thought before my consciousness finally shattered and my very existence became the song itself. Lady SYRINE. Lady SYRINE. Verita and Wellmanor were trying their best but received no response. SYRINE's eyes remained shut and she stood as still as a statue on a gigantic podium. This is not good. Is it even medically possible for her to remain standing while fainted? Wellmanor asked her companion frantically, but Verita was way ahead, voxing to the support team nearby to prepare for a medical emergency, and Kira had headed out to guide the support team over. Verita had just requested further assistance on asking for a levitating stretcher when suddenly a golden halo much larger and brighter than the one they had witnessed manifested on SYRINE. As the podium became covered in holy radiance, both sisters found themselves kneeling down reflexively and they watched in awe as the feeling of power emanating from their holy daughter continued to climb. While SYRINE had remained motionless, her halo steadily became brighter and brighter until it felt like a miniature sun. My lady? Wellmanor asked but still received no response. Just as the sisters thought the events unfolding before them were unusual enough, to their utter bewilderment every device with a speaker within their vicinity suddenly came alive, playing a strange instrumental music, and SYRINE started singing in her trance-like state. On the battlefield just moments earlier, the final assault of the rebels' forces came face to face with an eerie sight. Their enemies were where they should be in the distance, but on top of the defensive line were squadrons of hovering Nunchus Imagifier flyers with huge holograms underneath them displaying the portrait of a regal lady with her eyes closed. Undeterred by the odd formation awaiting them, the rebel army pressed forward, determined to finally have an honest fight with their enemy, and were eager to redeem themselves for all their failings today. Then the strange sight got stranger still as a blinding halo with a peculiar quality manifested on the huge holograms of the lady. With that, an overwhelming presence was felt across the battlefield and an unspoken message delivered: "Stand down, your sovereign is here." The strange sight was extremely intimidating to the lesser-willed individuals while compelling subservience to those people with a stronger sense of faith. While their mileage may vary, the result was ultimately the same. Most rebel troopers stopped marching forwards and many even knelt down. Even seasoned tank commanders were unconsciously putting their war machines to a halt at the sight of it. Then the armies watched in disbelief as the lady in the giant hologram started to sing. A strange but pleasant melody started to play across the battlefield. It dominated all the channels on the long-range Vox, it took over the short-range Vox, it blared in the confines of combat vehicles, and it resonated in the sky with all the Nunchus halos broadcasting the song from high up. It's only love. It's only love. Moshimo Nagai Hitotsu Dake, Kanal Nara tilde. The song went on and on, singing in a language no one understood but sounded strangely nostalgic. Close to 1 million souls watched and listened in stunned silence as what could only be described as the largest open-air solo performance ever happened right before them during a war. Beautiful world, beautiful boy. Meanwhile, back at the podium of Wires, Verita and Wellmanor were freaking out as SYRINE continued to sing her otherworldly song. What is going on? Why is she singing and what language is that? It was Verita's turn to ask questions as she pestered the scholar about the unfathomable sight before them. This sounds like ancient Terran? But it seemed mixed. I don't really know. Wellmanor was totally flustered and could not make any sense of what was going on. Little did she know at that exact moment the same song was permeating on the whole battlefield. Back on the battlefield, the lady in the holograms continued to sing with her eyes closed. She was gently swaying to the rhythm of her song, her voice soothing, and the sight of her radiant halo had a pacifying effect, making people instinctively lower their weapons. People on both sides of the battlefield had their eyes glued to the unusual event, while those further away from the spectacular sight were mesmerized by the unusual song echoing everywhere. Soon, no one was fighting, but the battle formations had already been locked in motion, so the encirclement of the rebel army continued. During the brief surreal period when the song lasted, only a small portion of the rebel forces were aware that their Baneblades had suddenly broken ranks from their respective battle groups. They watched in awe as the super-heavy tanks charged at full cruising speed straight into the enemy lines under the cover of suspiciously well-timed smoke screens, leaving their confused comrades behind with little way to notify the rest of the army on what was going on. Meanwhile, inside the indomitable Fury, Lord General Luther was experiencing a world of trouble. Moments ago, his Baneblade was suddenly moving on its own accord and had been pushing forward with maximum speed towards the enemy, while his contact with the outside world was totally cut off as the strange song had taken over all the Vox network. Unable to contact anyone. It is all the same song on all the channels. The communication officer lamented. I have no control. The driver could be heard yelling as the indomitable Fury continued moving forward. My lord, the main turret is turning 180 by itself. At this rate, we won't even have the main gun to protect ourselves. Another crew member yelled. After watching the ridiculous events unfolding for a while, Luther snapped back to his senses and quickly went to the engine room himself. The Lord General was looking for the Mechonicus engineer who was dedicated to the service of indomitable Fury. If there was anyone who could bring back the control of his tank, it would be one of the cogs. Zelton. Luther bellowed. Receiving no response, he went into the depths of the engine room. Engineer Zelton. Where are you? Down in the engine room. It was cramped, dark and noisy as hell. The Lord General himself seldom ventured down here, and most crew members were only too happy to leave it as the engineer's sole domain. It took a while for Luther's eyes to adjust for the dimly lit space. For a moment the Lord General was convinced his engineer had somehow disappeared, until he saw a robbed figure hunched at the very corner of the engine room. The tech adept seemed transfixed on something in front of him. Zelton. Throne, damn it, why won't you respond? Luther crouched over and grabbed the engineer by his shoulder. It was only then the engineer seemed to realize he was not alone. My lord. Zelton stammered. My crew has lost control of the indomitable Fury. What is going on with my tank? Are we being hijacked? Luther demanded. Hijack? The engineer answered dreamily until a hint of realization appeared on the still human-looking part of his face, and he quickly refuted the Lord General. No, my lord, nothing like that. Zelton replied confidently. His voice was so calm in this apparent crisis it was surprising even to the Lord General, and he demanded, what do you mean? The tank is heading towards the enemy line without control even as we speak. Get it back to our control now. I can't. Do you see this, my lord? Zelton pointed to a small glowing screen in front of him. Luther took a peek and saw nothing comprehensible to him. I see it, but nothing makes sense to me. Explain plainly and quickly. Zelton nodded and continued. I have never seen anything like it myself before, but this appears to be a genuine administrative level command coming from the outside. Meaning a higher authority is here, my lord. Someone very close to the source of Omnissiah is on this planet, and that person is currently giving commands to the indomitable Fury. As children and disciples of the machine god, we must obey. Luther froze. So you see, The indomitable fury is not being hijacked, it is merely obeying orders from a higher authority, like children obeying their parents, soldiers obeying their general or space marines obeying the emperor. The Lord General opened his mouth but no words came out. Now if you will excuse me, I need to attend to my duties. Zelton finished his explanation. He then turned towards the engine, knelt down and started kowtowing to it while chanting, "O great Omnisire, I hear and obey thy command." For a moment, Luther considered shooting the engine seer but in the end decided against it. The Lord General reasoned Zelton's service will still be needed in the future after he wins the war. For now, he just needed to salvage the situation. Back at the podium of wires, the song was finally over. SYRINE immediately shut down and collapsed to the ground, sending both Verita and Wulmina into utter panic. Destinies collided, fates changed. Much earlier, when the rebels were about to make their first major push just after Inquisitor Thaberus dropped his urgent warning, something unusual happened at the ritual site. Fate has it that somewhere in the Immaterium, swimming in the eternal and infinite Empyrean Sea, an ageless consciousness took notice of a faint calling originating from beyond space and time. Made by an intelligence with an understanding of the ether, there was a right type of ring to this calling. Several lesser never-born were already flocking to it. Like carrion flies they loitered around the source of summoning and were licking at offerings pouring through the veil, gathering strength to pass through space-time to directly feast in that world. The arrival of the ageless consciousness startled the lesser never-born. Like an apex predator entering into a scene of primal feasting, its lesser kin scattered hurriedly to avoid its wrath, leaving the opening solely to it. The unknowable thing investigated the source and let a part of its impossible self sample the other side for the briefest of period, and found it lacking. The calling offered the essence of blood and souls of sentient beings, but the quantity was petty and its initial offering paltry for its appetite. There were many other similar happenings which offered much more substantial rewards. Unimpressed, the consciousness decided to ignore this calling when a certain aspect of what it sampled caught its attention. There, within the myriad of information it tasted was a faint residue of a very rare type of existence, an existence which would be an anathema to its kind, one that a never-born would consider being its bane. Intrigued, for a moment it thought of further investigating before deciding whatever it had sensed was too weak and not worth the attention. It would hardly recoup its energy and resources. Still, it had really disliked the hint of that existence, so much so the idea of leaving it alone greatly displeased it. Kill it. Such anathema called upon itself to be erased. But the tediousness of doing it, the energy involved and the insignificance of that existence's level of strength made it teetered on the very edge of indecisiveness. Do something about it? Leave it alone? Leave it be. No, kill it. Leave it be. Kill it. Why not both? Finally decided on its course of action, the impossible thing pushed a tiny piece of itself over the edge of space and time. It then poured its rage and displeasure into that portion of itself and then severed it. Go forth, with wordless directive it commanded its splintered self and imbued it with just enough power to cross the veil. Seek that which displeases us and erase it from existence. Sustain thyself with sentient essence on the other side. Do not return until no sentient being can be found in that world. Its splintered self groaned in agonizing acknowledgement, and with the granted energy it crossed the threshold of eternal horizons. Homing to the source of calling, it pushed itself through the veil between dimensions, and there it would take the form of screaming tormented rage made flesh. Throne on terror saves us all. Inquisitor Thaberus watched with unconcealed horror at the trail of carnage left by something truly massive. Along the path of wanton destruction it had left behind were the entrails of its many victims and vague chunks of human remains. Whatever it was, it had clawed its way out of an underground facility and left a hole on the side of a reinforced building the size of an Imperial Knight Super Heavy Walker. All the heavy weapons that guarded the facility were useless against it, the gory remains of their users and the weapons' trashed state a silent testament to that. There was even an upside-down tank on the roof that was still burning with a raging fire. Well, this is something we don't see often enough. For once the heretics purged themselves, and it looks like whatever they summoned was not under their control, nor was it on their side. Interrogator Amel's unsolicited attempt at dry humor received no response. Track that thing. Have the task force secure the perimeter. Nobody gets in or out before this is over. Thaberus ordered. Not waiting for a response, he opened a vox call to his gunship.
Monsieur.
Sir. Have the Flame Raven switch its heavy bolter ammunition to sight cannon bolts. Relay to the Unrelenting Vigilance to ready the Exterminator's solution for immediate deployment. Sir?
You heard me right. We have a breach, threat level maxima. Pray we do not have to deploy it.
Sir. Thabrus closed the Vox and could not help himself but muttered a silent prayer for the order he just relayed.
The Emperor grants us strength, please don't let it come to this.
Then the notion that SYRINE was on the planet derailed his thought for a moment, but tried as he might, the image of her petite frame just could not size up with the level of threat they were facing. He sighed, shook his head to refocus and turned to his retinue. Now, do any of you have any idea of where it went?
That way,
Sanctioned Psyker Fulton said as he pointed his staff in a direction, his eyes glowing with psychic power. It is moving fast. I can feel its red-hot anger, added his partner Zali. She was shivering from what she had sensed.
Why going that way?
What is in that direction? Reintor asked as he tried but failed to relax his grip on the Hashot volley gun, which would not be seeing any action in this raid operation.
That direction, gasped Acolyte Erlindyre, but it was Thabrus who finished her sentence. The way to the battlefield.
Back on the battlefield, Lord General Luther von Norden was furious beyond words. From his point of view, his big day of triumph had been totally ruined by a never-ending amount of underhanded tricks and honorless subterfuge. As the ridiculous events unfolded one after another, accumulating to the present where the symbol of might of the Northern Grand Army was being driven away like a victim of Grand Theft Auto while his entire army was being distracted by a song. This was totally not how the Lord General had envisioned his day would turn out to be. When it became clear if Luther had stayed on the Baneblade he would end up being kidnapped himself, the Lord General opted to climb out of the super heavy tank and jumped off instead. The landing was harsh. Luther survived but sprained his leg. His command squad who had followed him on the jump picked him up, and luckily they were soon being picked up by a Taurox transport that was following the Baneblade not so far behind. Suffice to say, finding their Supreme Commander limping in the middle of a chaotic battlefield with a singing lady as the backdrop was not how Squadjahat had envisioned their day would turn out to be. After getting the Luther and his command squad inside, Squadjahat's Taurox turned back towards their combat line, passing through formations of tanks and troops who had stopped moving forward with its inside cramped up with the extra personnel and a grey-faced Lord General. Soon after that the song ended, the Vox network suddenly went back to normal again and another chaotic hell broke loose as the absurdity of the battle situation became apparent to all. First, all three Baneblades of the rebel army had been hijacked. Obeying an unknown directive, the super heavy tanks went to their designated spot and proceeded to shut down after arriving. 2 out of 3 battle group commanders were still inside their tank when the Battle Sisters came knocking with melter guns. Both the kidnapped commanders surrendered in the following standoff. Meanwhile, the news of SYRINE fainting sent a shockwave in Catalina's camp. Cryptora took over as the overall commanding figure, but without SYRINE's authority ability they no longer held total dominance over the Vox network, allowing the rebels to finally utilize their Vox communication to some degree again. But what awaited them was a tsunami of bad news. The endless calls for medical aid, weapons and supplies, coupled with urgent reports of being surrounded by all sides, flooded their Vox as the encircling forces were finally being spotted. Evidently most troopers in the rebel camp had seen enough. Even the most tactically challenged soldier had realized their opposition was showing them a tremendous amount of mercy and restraint. When the holographic image and recordings of their battle group commanders surrendering to the sororitas appeared in the air, the fighting will of the smaller battle groups fell apart and their next highest ranking officers soon declared their surrender. In the biggest battle group at the center, cracks were appearing, with troops stationed at the outermost layers silently slipping away to escape or surrender. As this battle was considered to be a civil dispute involving no Astra Militarum regiments, no commissars were present to go around shooting fleeing soldiers, and soon there was an exodus of surrendering or fleeing troops. Some of the fleeing troops escaped to the path they came from, squeezing through the tiny gaps between Catalina's forces before they could complete their encirclement. Since not incurring casualties was their primary objective at that moment, the governor's troops let the disorganized fleeing rebels pass through the gaps uncontested. To Luther's credit, a sizable portion of the most elite and die-hard bunch of the rebel army had stayed with him as the encirclement was being completed. Surrounded on all sides with no way of escaping, it was a last stand, and soon a talk between the two sides was being held to discuss terms. Premonition, something had arrived, something huge. An angry twisted thing, a thing that should not have existed in this world. Its existence should not have been possible, but a price was paid. Be warned, it is here to seek you out. You, yes, you were their anathema's bloodline. Now an equal or greater price must be paid to see it gone, or this world of man will die. Again, you were its target and the key to its banishment. I regained consciousness. The first thing I heard was Verita berating someone. She was sounding like a pissed-off girlfriend on a messy breakout, but that was so contradictory to my mental image of her. Verita? I called out. My voice sounded weak, surprising even myself. I opened my eyes and was immediately blinded by the bright medical lights shining down at me. It made me reflexively raise my hand to block the illuminations. Someone gasped and grabbed my hand. It was Wellmanna. Verita. Lady SYRINE has woken up. Wellmanna, where am I? Help me up. No, you need to stay down. She popped into my view, her face full of concerns. No, get me up. The war, what happened to the war? And the thing. A cold chill went down my spine as the premonition I felt during my delirium state surfaced. Thanks to your song, the last I heard from the front line was that the war is being wrapped up. Wellmanna answered reverently. Song? I was confused. Oddly enough, the level of respect coming from her to me seemed to have gone up a notch. Why is this happening after my shameful performance of fainting on the most critical battle? Lady SYRINE. Verita came running to me as Wellmanna was helping me to sit up. My lady, is it true? I have tried to verify with the quartermaster of the fortress, but, is it true you have not eaten a single meal since you're staying at the fortress? Meal? I was stumped for a moment before remembering I never once felt hungry and was being swamped by the never-ending amount of meetings ever since the start of my lodging at the fortress. Now that I think about it, I hardly even drank a sip of water. No, I have not eaten anything at the fortress. Verita choked on her breath upon hearing my answer, but before she could say anything more, a skull probe that had been silently hovering nearby became active and floated in front of me. SYRINE? My princess. Are you operational? It was Cryptora. I held my hand up at Verita and then pointed at the probe, that shut down her impending berating. Crypto. Sorry I fainted. What happened while I was out? I have good news and bad news. Good news first, your plan worked. We got all 3 Baneblades and there were little casualties. The majority of the fighting had stopped and still no signs of the renegade Astartes. That concludes the good news. I gulped. Please continue. Now the bad news. Inquisitor Thorn arrived at the ritual site, finding only it in ruins with dead cultists. A high-threat level warp entity had come through and it had already left the site. While the Inquisitor did not inform me of this, but I know he had deemed its threat level to be serious enough to order his ship to prepare for exterminatus. Wait, what? What came through? By the Inquisitor's request, I had some of my reconnaissance assets tailing it now. Sending to you field imaging now. It is heading towards the center of the battlefield as we speak. An image popped up in my vision, confirming my dread. There amongst the landscape, flying at incredible speed, was a gigantic horned humanoid entity with leathery wings, a bloodthirster, probably the angrier type. But why? Didn't we cut down the bloodshed to a very low level with the actions we had taken? And why was it in black color, a greater demon in the physical realm? Whatever it entails, I was guessing it was not as simple as shooting it down like in the video game. The very existence of this being was already defying the natural law of the universe. Crypto, how powerful is this thing? Can we send in mass soldiers and tanks to grind it down? Regarding that question, I had tried backtracking its path from the ritual site and found this. Relaying recorded picked feed to you now. Another vision popped up in my view. It seemed to be from the point of view of a skull probe. At first, I could not tell what I was seeing. It was as if my brain was refusing to acknowledge the ridiculous sight. After a short while, like a switch being turned on, I saw the vision as what it was, a scene of pure carnage, the aftermath of some uber butchery. It was a field completely stained red and black with blood. Chunks of what appeared to be human parts, broken bones and random innards could be seen littering everywhere, accompanied by a sea of burning wrecks. The level of violence needed to create this scenery was borderline satirical. Something was making a statement. From the clues gathered on site, This would be the 144th Mobile Infantry Division of the Rebel Army led by a Colonel Arnold. Cryptora continued to explain as the view on the field of carnage moved to a particular spot, focusing on a pile of splattered flesh. This appears to be the deceased colonel. The identification tag and what was left of the lower jaw is a match with the dental records. With this we can deduce conventional troops and tactics might be totally ineffective against this warp spawn. I was speechless. My survey of the site had also uncovered another interesting fact. The warp spawn appeared to be gaining strength, as evidence suggests the level of blunt trauma force applied to the troops was steadily increasing after the initial contact from this area. Cryptora continued to explain away, but my mind was already tuning out, looking at the larger picture and its implications. This thing was gaining strength by slaughtering people. If left alone it will just continue gathering power from all the killings. As it does so it might even summon more of its kin to escalate the slaughtering. My mind went to the billions of people here, the psychic beacon and the incoming ships. Suddenly I saw nothing but a little sea of blood. My blood ran cold, I shivered. This thing might be the end of us all. What am I supposed to do? Run away? We can still run, right? Leave this planet, leave the beacon, leave the people. Then I remembered the combined souls of all the people I saw in that sea of wishes and my pledge to the sisters. The premonition I experienced earlier came back to me like lightning. You are its target and the key to its banishment. Damn it. Throne damned it. I had made up my mind. Crypto. Yes, omniscient princess. I await your directive. Please send me the list of deployable secret weapons you are willing to depart for the final gambit of this venture. We will see if the situation is salvageable from there. It could be a hard sell, but using older toys to trade for shiny new ones should be a tempting prospect even for famous hoarders like them, and I was sure the Archdominus was keeping a few cards hidden. So I waited for the reply. Very well. And please get me a fast ride to the front line. I need to pick up my sword from Canonus Diadonar. Understood. Finally, have as many forces as possible under your command heading to it right now. We will need all the firepower we can get to light that thing up like the Emperor's Day Parade.